My doctor looked at my chart and asked, "How are you handling the pregnancy?" I laughed. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm a man." Dr. Dill's face softened into this understanding expression. "I understand, and we support you here. This is a safe space." She reached across the desk and patted my hand. What the hell was happening? No, seriously, I'm literally just a regular dude here for a while. The door opened, and a nurse walked in, carrying prenatal vitamins and a stack of pamphlets. The top one read, "Your Journey, Pregnancy During Transition." She set them down gently like I might spook. "Your identity is valid, honey. We see lots of pregnant men here." My brain short-circuited. I just moved to this city 3 weeks ago for a software job. Nobody here knew me. The nurse was already on the phone. "Yes, we need approval for pregnancy care for a transgender male." "Already approved? Perfect." She hung up and smiled at me. "Your insurance already approved everything. You're so lucky to have good coverage. Listen, there's been a mix-up. I cannot be pregnant. I don't have the equipment." They exchanged this knowing look that made me want to scream. Dr. Dill typed something into her computer. "Would you like to speak with our high-risk pregnancy specialist? Sometimes denial can be dangerous for the baby. The baby that didn't exist. In the uterus I didn't have." The nurse was already texting someone. "Dr. Yazir can squeeze you in. She's wonderful with trans pregnancies. Will your partner Igor be joining?" "Who the EF is Igor?" The words exploded out before I could stop them. The nurse rubbed my shoulder. "Mood swings are perfectly normal in your first trimester, especially with the hormones from transitioning." I grabbed my jacket and walked out. They called after me about prenatal care, but I kept moving. The apartment building's group chat was blowing up when I parked. I opened it expecting complaints about parking. Instead, "Congrats to 6B on the pregnancy. So brave. My cousin is trans and pregnant too. Gender reveal party in the courtyard?" These people I'd never met were planning my baby shower. I was typing a frantic message to clear things up when my new boss called. "Hello, sir. HR just informed me about your pregnancy. We'll need to adjust your workspace for safety. No more server room duties." My career was literally being derailed. "Charlie, I'm not pregnant. Someone's playing a prank." He chuckled like I'd made a dad joke. "Take all the time you need to process. We support you. And hey, you'll always be a real man to me." My phone was ringing nonstop. Unknown numbers. I answered one. "Hi. This is Chelsea from Transparent Magazine. We'd love to feature your pregnancy journey." I hung up. Another call immediately. "Is this the viral pregnant trans man? I'm a documentary filmmaker --block." Another. "Your story inspired me to start trying with my husband." I recognized the next number. My landlord. "FYI, you'll need to add the baby to the lease. Also, the couple in 2A wants to throw you a shower in the community room." Even my housing was now affected. I sat in the pharmacy parking lot Googling myself. There it was. A whole Facebook profile I didn't create. Photos of me with some random guy labeled Igor. Ultrasound photos. A baby registry. The clinic system logs had shown St. Mary's. My college roommate Declan was doing his residency there. The same Declan whose wife was pregnant. The same Declan I'd joked with about having sympathy pregnancy when I felt nauseous from bad Thai food. I called him from the parking lot. He picked up laughing. "Did your mom call yet?" She's so excited. My vision went red. "Declan, what did you do?" His cackle got louder. "Remember when you said you felt more pregnant than my wife? I gave you the full experience. Created a whole medical profile. Pregnant trans man. Posted in support groups. Even made you a boyfriend named Igor." The next call was from building security. "Sir, there's a news van here saying you're expecting?" I looked up. A no-name college news crowd was setting up in the parking lot. A reporter was already approaching cars asking about the inspiring pregnant man in 6B. I locked myself in my apartment. Good riddance. Until a week later, when I saw Declan at a restaurant with Isa. The nurse from the clinic I'd been working up courage to ask out for months. She was laughing at something on his phone. That's when I realized this was never about a prank. I stood frozen outside the restaurant window, my feet stuck to the sidewalk like they'd been glued there, watching Isa throw her head back laughing at whatever Declan just showed her on his phone. My hand started shaking when I saw him lean closer to point at something on the screen, his other hand casually touching her shoulder. And that's when it hit me like a punch to the gut, that this whole nightmare wasn't just about humiliating me, it was about removing me as competition. I backed away from the window before they could spot me, and started walking home in a daze, my legs moving on autopilot while my brain raced through every interaction, since I'd mentioned wanting to ask Isa out 3 weeks ago. Declan had seemed so supportive when I told him about her, even offered to put in a good word since he worked at the same hospital system, said he'd mention what a great guy I was, and now I understood why he'd been so eager to help. My apartment door slammed harder than I meant it to when I got back, and I immediately pulled out my laptop and started documenting everything, creating folders for the fake profiles, screenshots of the clinic visit confirmation, the insurance approval emails, every single piece of evidence I could find. I opened a spreadsheet and built a timeline showing exactly when each thing happened, marking the date I'd told Declan about Isa and how his prank mysteriously started just 2 days later. The correlation too perfect to be coincidence. Monday morning came, and I called the clinic the second they opened, demanding they correct my records immediately. The receptionist put me on hold for 10 minutes, then transferred me to billing who said they couldn't help, then to medical records who transferred me to patient advocacy. And finally someone explained I'd need to come in person with legal documentation proving I wasn't pregnant, like somehow the burden was on me to prove I didn't have a uterus. My next call was to a lawyer who specialized in identity theft and medical fraud, someone I found through my company's legal referral service. She listened to my whole story without interrupting, taking notes I could hear her typing, then said we definitely had a strong case. But warned me the medical system moved like molasses when it came to correcting errors, even obvious ones like a biological male being listed as pregnant. I hung up feeling both validated and frustrated, then went straight to the FTC website to file an identity theft report online. The form took forever to fill out, asking for dates and details and documentation. And when it got to the part asking if I knew who did this, I typed Declan's full name with satisfaction, knowing there would finally be consequences for what he'd done to my life. Tuesday morning, Charlie called me into his office to discuss what he called my transition back to full duties post-pregnancy, which made me want to scream. I showed him the FTC report with the case number, explained the whole situation from the beginning, pointed out the timeline showing it was fraud. But he just nodded sympathetically and said HR still needed official medical clearance before I could return to the server room, company policy about pregnancy and hazardous environments. That evening I was heating up leftover Chinese food when someone knocked on my door, and I opened it to find a woman from 6C introducing herself as Monica. She said she moderated the building chat and wanted to check in about the baby shower planning, suggesting maybe we should pause everything until I was ready, clearly trying to be supportive of what she thought was my journey through pregnancy and transition. I tried explaining it was all fake, but she just patted my arm and said denial was normal. She'd be there when I was ready to talk. Wednesday, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with media requests. Every notification another podcast or documentary or article about trans pregnancy wanting to feature my story. I declined them all with the same copied message about privacy, but then one reporter mentioned they'd already interviewed my partner, Igor, for their piece, which sent actual chills down my spine. Because whoever was pretending to be this fictional boyfriend was taking this way too far. Thursday morning brought an email from my landlord with an attached addendum to my lease, requesting an increased security deposit for the baby, citing potential property damage from children and the need to baby-proof the apartment. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who replied within an hour saying she was adding it to our growing list of damages from Declan's fraud. The financial impact now including my career, my housing, my insurance premiums, and my reputation in ways I was still discovering. Friday morning, my lawyer called to say she'd sent cease and desist letters to every platform hosting those fake profiles. She'd included the FTC case number in bold at the top of each letter and threatened immediate legal action if they didn't remove everything within 72 hours. The letter to Transparent Magazine went certified mail with a return receipt requested. She also reported the fraudulent medical records directly to St. Mary's Hospital Compliance Department, which triggered an automatic investigation into their system security. The compliance officer promised to review every single access log from Declan's account, going back 6 months. I spent the rest of the morning organizing screenshots of every fake post, every profile, every message into labeled folders on my laptop. My coworker, Bradley, knocked on my cubicle wall around lunch and showed me his phone screen where the company Slack had a whole congratulations thread about my pregnancy. He closed his office door and sat down across from me without saying anything for a minute. Then he explained he'd dealt with identity issues at his last job when someone used his credentials for insider trading. He knew exactly how frustrating it was when nobody believed you were the victim. He offered to help me draft communications to HR that would get their attention without making me sound crazy. That afternoon, I got an email about the upcoming apartment building board meeting with the agenda attached as a PDF. Item 4 was literally planning baby shower for 6B with Monica listed as the discussion leader. I walked down to her apartment and knocked until she answered. She tried to table the discussion when I explained again that I wasn't pregnant, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She probably thought I was in denial or scared about becoming a parent. The mail arrived while I was walking back upstairs, including a thick packet from my insurance company filled with prenatal care brochures and coverage details. The cover letter explained my benefits for ultrasounds, genetic testing, delivery costs, and postpartum care. To stop the coverage, they needed an official physician statement confirming I wasn't pregnant. But when I called the clinic, they insisted I needed to attend an in-person counseling session before they'd provide any documentation. They scheduled me for the following Tuesday at 2 o'clock. I asked my lawyer if her paralegal could come as a witness, and she agreed immediately. The weekend passed in a blur of organizing evidence and fielding confused texts from coworkers who'd seen the Slack thread. Tuesday came, and I walked into that same clinic with the paralegal beside me, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Dr. Dill spent 20 minutes talking about pregnancy denial and how dangerous it could be for the baby's health. She showed me pamphlets about trans men who'd given birth successfully. She asked about my support system and whether I felt safe at home. The paralegal kept writing everything down without commenting. Finally, after going in circles for almost half an hour, Dr. Dill agreed to review my actual medical history from before the fraudulent entries. She pulled up my real records from my previous doctor and saw years of normal male physicals with no indication of any female anatomy. Her face went pale as she compared the timestamps and realized the pregnancy records were all entered remotely through the hospital system, not during any actual visit. She printed out a statement confirming I had never been her patient for pregnancy care and that the records appeared to be fraudulent. That evening, I sat in my car for 10 minutes before finally texting Issa directly to explain everything that had happened. I kept it short and factual, explaining how Declan had created the whole pregnancy story as a prank that got out of control. The message showed as read almost immediately, but she didn't respond. 3 days passed without any reply. Wednesday morning, HR sent an official email removing me from all server room duties, effective immediately due to pregnancy safety protocols. They emphasized my salary would remain the same, but I couldn't access any areas with electromagnetic equipment until medical clearance was provided. This basically killed my path to senior developer, since server architecture was a core requirement for the promotion. My lawyer immediately drafted a detailed letter to my employer, explaining the identity theft situation and requesting temporary accommodation while we resolved the fraud. She attached the FTC report, the clinic's correction statement, and correspondence with the hospital showing they were investigating. HR responded that they'd review the documentation, but couldn't change my duties without following proper procedures. The following Monday, I had to meet with the compliance officer from St. Mary's in a small conference room at their administrative building. I brought my timeline printed out with every event marked clearly, folders of screenshots showing the fake profiles and posts, and a transcript of Declan's phone confession that I'd managed to record on my laptop. The investigator was a serious woman in her 50s who took detailed notes about everything. She asked specific questions about dates and times, cross-referencing my answers with something on her laptop screen. She showed me access logs, proving all the fraudulent entries came from Declan's login credentials during his scheduled shifts. She had me sign several forms, authorizing them to use my testimony in their internal review process. Before I left, she mentioned that falsifying medical records was grounds for immediate termination from the residency program and could affect his medical license. The investigation would take several weeks, but she seemed confident they had enough evidence to take action. 2 days later, my phone rang with Declan's number while I was reviewing server logs at work. I almost didn't answer, but figured I should hear what excuse he'd cooked up this time. His voice sounded different, nervous instead of cocky like before. "Listen, man, things got out of hand with that joke." I stayed quiet and let him keep talking while I recorded the call on my laptop. "The hospital's asking questions, and I need you to tell them it was just a misunderstanding between friends." My grip tightened on the phone as he kept going. "Nobody needs to lose their career over a prank that went too far." The word prank made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. "You created fake medical records, told my boss I was pregnant, and destroyed my reputation." He tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "This isn't a prank anymore. It's fraud that damaged my career and my life." His tone shifted to defensive immediately. "Come on, you know how hard residency is, and this could ruin everything I've worked for." I couldn't believe he was playing victim after what he'd done to me. "Maybe you should have thought about that before committing medical fraud." He started talking faster, more desperate now. "Look, Issa doesn't need to know about our drama. This is between us." That's when I hung up on him. My hands were shaking as I saved the recording and forwarded it to my lawyer immediately. Bradley knocked on my cubicle wall 10 minutes later, holding his tablet with a confused look on his face. "Dude, you need to see this article from the hospital's newsletter." He turned the screen toward me and there it was, a whole feature about St. Mary's innovative trans pregnancy program. They'd used my fake case as their main example, without using my name, but with enough details that anyone could figure it out. The article talked about their groundbreaking support for pregnant trans men and how they were leading the region in inclusive care. They'd violated medical privacy laws even with fake records by publishing specific details about my supposed pregnancy. Bradley sat down hard in the spare chair looking stunned. "They can't just publish your medical info like this, even if it's fake." I immediately screenshotted everything and sent it to my lawyer, who called me within 5 minutes. She said this added a whole new legal dimension to the case, since they'd used fraudulent records for publicity. That's when everything clicked together in my head about what Declan had really been doing. He didn't just want to date Issa. He wanted to be her hero while she dealt with me. He'd painted himself as the supportive friend helping her handle the difficult trans patient who had a crush on her. The whole pregnancy story gave him a reason to comfort her about dealing with my supposed mood swings and denial. He'd manufactured the perfect narrative to make himself look good while making me look unstable. My phone buzzed with an unknown local number that afternoon. The woman identified herself as a reporter from the city paper, investigating medical identity fraud cases. She'd gotten wind of my situation through sources at the hospital, and wanted to verify facts for her story. I agreed to speak on background only, meaning she could use the information but not quote me directly. We met at a coffee shop downtown, where I showed her the fake profiles, the insurance documents, and the clinic's correction letter. She took photos of everything while asking detailed questions about the timeline and who was involved. She seemed particularly interested in how the hospital's systems had been compromised so easily. After she left, I spent the entire evening at my lawyer's office organizing evidence into a comprehensive packet. We printed every screenshot of the fake Facebook profile, with timestamps clearly visible. We organized each fake post chronologically to show how Declan had built the false narrative over time. The insurance communications went into a separate folder showing the financial fraud aspect. My lawyer created a timeline document marking every single event from the first clinic visit to the current date. We included the recorded phone calls, the text messages, and every email related to the case. She bound it all into a professional presentation that made the pattern of deception undeniable. The compliance interview I'd already done at St. Mary's had been thorough, but now they called me back for follow-up questions. The investigator seemed even more serious this time, as she showed me their preliminary findings. She had printouts of system logs showing every fraudulent entry traced back to Declan's login credentials. Each false record had been created from his assigned workstation during his scheduled shifts at the hospital. She showed me security footage placing him at that exact computer during the times the records were created. The digital trail was perfect and directly linked every single fraudulent entry to him personally. 3 days after that, Issa finally responded to the message I'd sent her weeks ago. Her text was short, but seemed genuine about not knowing the pregnancy was fake. She said Declan had told her I was struggling with my identity and going through a difficult time. She needed time to process that he'd lied to her about everything, including my supposed mental state. I didn't respond, because there wasn't really anything left to say between us at this point. The hospital's IT audit came back the next week with devastating findings for their security protocols. Every fake record had been created using Declan's unique login from his assigned computer terminal. The audit showed he'd accessed my records 17 times over 3 weeks to add false information. They found he'd even downloaded template forms for trans pregnancy care to make the records look authentic. St. Mary's legal department contacted my lawyer 2 days later with a settlement proposal. They wanted to avoid any publicity about their security failures and offered compensation with a non-disclosure agreement. My lawyer reviewed it carefully and pointed out they were trying to bury the whole incident. The NDA would prevent me from discussing how their systems had been compromised or how the fraud had occurred. We both knew they were more worried about their reputation than making things right with me. My lawyer drafted a counteroffer the next morning, demanding specific things from the hospital. She typed up 3 pages listing corrective letters they needed to send to my employer and insurance company. The NDA they wanted would only cover the dollar amount, not the actual facts about what happened. She sent it over while I sat in her office watching her work through each point. The hospital's lawyers called back within 2 hours trying to negotiate, but she held firm on every demand. They finally agreed to send formal corrections to everyone affected, plus implement new verification protocols for patient records. Charlie called me into his office that afternoon after getting the lawyer's letter explaining everything. He looked really uncomfortable sitting there reading through the documentation about the fraud. He agreed to stop any career changes until the whole mess got sorted out and seemed embarrassed about how HR had handled things. The building's monthly meeting was that evening in the community room, and I knew I had to show up. Monica had put me on the agenda to address the pregnancy rumors once and for all. I stood up in front of 40 neighbors holding the hospital's correction letter. I explained that I was never pregnant, and it was all medical fraud by someone at the hospital. The room went dead quiet while people processed what I was saying. Some neighbors looked skeptical, like I was making excuses, while others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One guy actually asked if I was sure I wasn't just in denial, which made my blood boil. I sat down and let Monica move to the next topic, while people whispered among themselves. The next morning, I filled out the complaint form for the state medical board about falsified medical records. The form asked for specific dates and documentation, which I had ready thanks to my lawyer's organization. I attached copies of the fraudulent records and the hospital's admission that they were fake. Even though Declan was still in residency, this complaint could affect his whole medical career. I mailed it certified with return receipt requested to make sure they got it. Transparent Magazine sent an email 2 days later saying they were removing their article about my journey. Chelsea wrote that their legal department reviewed my lawyer's letter and decided to retract everything. She mentioned the Internet Archive still had copies, but there was nothing they could do about that. The fake social media profiles started vanishing one by one as the platforms processed my fraud reports. Facebook took down the whole fake profile with Igor, and the baby registry disappeared from Amazon. Each notification about a successful takedown felt like getting a small piece of my life back. Twitter removed 3 fake accounts that had been posting about my pregnancy journey. Instagram deleted the profile with all the ultrasound photos Declan had posted. Even LinkedIn removed a fake profile someone had created showing me as a diversity speaker. St. Mary's finally sent out the official correction letters a week later to everyone involved. The letter to my insurance company stated clearly that no pregnancy existed and all records were fraudulent. They sent the same letter to my employer's HR department and to the clinic where this whole nightmare started. Each letter had the hospital administrator's signature and an official seal making it impossible to ignore. The insurance company called to confirm they'd removed all the false claims from my account. HR sent an email saying they'd updated my file and removed all the pregnancy-related restrictions. Even the clinic called to apologize for the confusion and confirm they'd corrected their records. Word got back to me through the hospital grapevine that Declan had been placed on administrative probation. He had to complete 30 hours of ethics training and couldn't see patients without supervision. The medical board's investigation was still pending, but the hospital had already started disciplinary action. His residency director apparently tore into him during a meeting about professionalism and ethics. Part of his probation required writing a formal apology letter, which arrived through official channels 2 weeks later. The letter read, like something his lawyer wrote with careful language about taking responsibility for poor judgment. He acknowledged creating false medical records, but avoided saying why he did it, or mentioning Issa at all. The whole thing felt hollow and calculated rather than genuine remorse for what he'd done. I didn't bother responding since there was nothing left to say between us. Issa finally texted, asking if we could meet for coffee to talk about everything that happened. We met at a shop downtown where she looked tired and stressed sitting across from me. She said she had no idea the pregnancy was fake until the hospital investigation started. Declan had told her I was going through identity issues, and she believed his story about supporting me. She admitted she should have questioned why the whole thing seemed so strange and complicated. We talked for an hour about how he'd manipulated both of us to get what he wanted. She apologized for not realizing sooner that something was wrong with his story about me. The conversation stayed polite, but we both knew there was too much damage for any kind of friendship. She mentioned transferring to a different hospital unit to get away from all the drama. I told her I understood, and we parted ways knowing we'd probably never speak again. Actually, she called me back 10 minutes after I left the coffee shop and said she needed to tell me something important. We met again that same afternoon at a park bench near the hospital where she worked. She sat down and started talking fast about how Declan had been texting her for weeks before the whole fake pregnancy thing started. He told her I was going through some kind of identity crisis and needed support from medical professionals who understood trans issues. She showed me screenshots on her phone of him saying I was in denial about my transition and that helping me accept my pregnancy would be part of my healing journey. The dates on those messages were from before he even created the fake medical records. She said she felt sick realizing how he'd set everything up to make himself look like the caring friend while making me seem unstable. The worst part was when she admitted he'd started asking her out. The same week, the news van showed up at my apartment. She transferred to pediatrics the next day just to avoid seeing him in the halls. HR called me that Tuesday with news that made my hands shake with relief. The correction letter from the hospital had finally cleared everything up, and they were removing all pregnancy restrictions from my file immediately. Charlie met with me that afternoon to go over the details and said I could return to the server room starting the next morning. He looked embarrassed when he admitted they should have verified the medical claims before changing my work duties. The damage to my promotion timeline was already done, though, since they'd hired someone else for the senior developer position while I was restricted. Charlie said they'd consider me for the next opening, but we both knew that could be months away. Monica posted in the building chat that night, explaining the whole situation without using anyone's names. She wrote that a resident had been victim of medical identity theft and asked everyone to respect their privacy going forward. Some neighbors replied with apology messages saying they felt terrible about planning the baby shower without checking first. Others stayed quiet, but I could feel the cold looks when I passed them in the hallway. Mrs. Queen from 4B actually knocked on my door to apologize in person and brought cookies she'd baked. The guy from 2A who'd wanted to throw the shower just avoided eye contact completely whenever we crossed paths. I spent 3 hours that weekend writing up my whole experience for an online privacy forum without naming Declan or the hospital. I stuck to the facts about how someone with medical system access created fake records that spread through insurance systems and social media. People responded with their own horror stories about identity theft and medical fraud. Someone who worked in the hospital IT explained how easy it was to alter records if you had the right access level. My post got thousands of views and helped start a discussion about verification protocols. The lawyer called Thursday morning saying the hospital had accepted our settlement terms. They'd pay me $15,000 for the damages and implement new verification requirements for updating patient records. The best part was no gag order, so I could still talk about what happened as long as I didn't name specific people. They also agreed to send formal apology letters to my employer and insurance company, taking full responsibility for the security breach. The new protocols they promised included requiring two-factor authentication for any gender or pregnancy status changes in patient files. Bradley helped me put together a lunch presentation at work about protecting your medical privacy and spotting identity theft. My coworkers sat there with their mouths open when I explained how someone created an entire fake pregnancy with just computer access. One guy asked how I discovered it was Declan, and I explained about recognizing the hospital connection from the clinic records. People started checking their own medical portals right there during lunch to make sure nothing weird showed up. Bradley added tips about freezing your medical records like you would credit reports. Someone from accounting mentioned they'd had their prescription history stolen once and hadn't known you could request verification alerts. A nurse friend who still worked at the hospital texted me that Declan was pulled from all patient rotations and stuck doing only research and paperwork. She said he had to complete 60 hours of remediation training and couldn't graduate from residency on time anymore. The medical board investigation was still ongoing, but everyone knew his career was basically ruined. She also mentioned Issa had requested a transfer to the children's hospital across town and seemed much happier there. His wife had filed for divorce after finding out about everything through the hospital investigation. I thought about leaving the city and starting fresh somewhere else, but decided that was letting him win. My apartment was nice, my job was solid even without the promotion, and I'd started making actual friends through the whole mess. Monica and I grabbed drinks sometimes, and Bradley became my gym buddy. I even started going on dates again through a dating app, though I was way more careful about sharing personal info. One woman I went out with actually thought the whole story was hilarious and wanted to hear every detail. 3 months after the clinic visit that started everything, I walked past that building on my way to lunch. My phone stayed quiet, no reporters called, no fake emergency existed anymore. The whole thing felt like some weird dream, except for the settlement check I'd deposited and the stack of correction letters in my filing cabinet. I'd learned to verify everything medical twice and set up alerts on all my accounts. The clinic had even sent an apology letter after their own investigation found their staff should have verified the suspicious records. Mom called that weekend after I'd finally sent her copies of all the official correction letters from the hospital. She went from confused to furious in about 30 seconds once she understood what Declan had done. She remembered him from college and couldn't believe he'd violated medical ethics like that just to steal a girl. She wanted to call his mother and give her a piece of her mind, but I talked her out of it. She said she was proud of how I'd handled everything through proper legal channels instead of just punching him in the face like she would have. 2 weeks later, the letter from the state medical board arrived in a thick envelope that I opened while standing in my kitchen. The formal reprimand against Declan took up 3 pages of legal language that basically said he'd broken every ethics rule about patient privacy and record keeping. His license stayed active, but this black mark would follow him forever, since any hospital checking his background would see the violation right there in the system. I took a photo of the key paragraph and sent it to my lawyer, who replied that this was better than we'd hoped for. The promotion meeting with Charlie happened 6 months after everything started, instead of right on schedule like it should have been. He sat across from me in the conference room shuffling papers while explaining that my handling of the whole mess actually showed real leadership, even though the situation itself was completely insane. The senior developer title came with a nice raise and access to better projects, but I couldn't help thinking about those lost 6 months when other people got promoted ahead of me. Monica knocked on my door that evening with a bottle of wine to celebrate the promotion she'd heard about through the building gossip network. We sat on my balcony drinking, and she told me stories about other crazy stuff that had happened in the building over the years, though nothing quite matched a fake pregnancy scandal. She helped me figure out which neighbors to avoid and which ones were actually cool once you got to know them. We started having regular Thursday night drinks, where we'd watch terrible reality TV, and she'd update me on building drama that didn't involve me for once. A full year passed before I felt like my life had really settled back to normal. My work projects were going great, with the senior title opening doors to more interesting assignments. The friends I'd made through the whole disaster turned out to be keepers who knew the full story and could laugh about it now. I started dating this woman from my rock climbing gym who thought the whole saga was the most entertaining first date story she'd ever heard. She kept asking for more details about the fake boyfriend, Igor, and whether I'd kept any of the pregnancy pamphlets as souvenirs. My buddy from the hospital texted me that Declan had finished his residency, but was having major trouble landing a real job. Every decent hospital ran background checks, and that medical board reprimand popped up immediately, making them pass on his application. His wife had divorced him after the investigation revealed how he'd manipulated both me and Issa to break us up before we even had a chance. He ended up taking some clinic job in a small town 3 hours away, where they were desperate enough to overlook his record. I ran into Issa at a coffee shop downtown on a random Tuesday morning when we both reached for the same newspaper someone had left on the counter. We both froze for a second before laughing at the awkwardness of it all. She was doing great at the Children's Hospital and had just gotten certified in some specialized pediatric procedure. We chatted for maybe 10 minutes about work stuff and carefully avoided mentioning Declan or the whole mess. There wasn't any romantic spark anymore, but no hard feelings either, since we'd both been victims of his scheme. She mentioned she was engaged to someone from her hiking club and seemed genuinely happy. My lawyer emailed me an article about a new court case where someone cited my situation as legal precedent for medical identity theft. The judge had ruled in favor of the victim, using my case as an example of how these violations could spiral out of control and cause real damage. Other people dealing with similar fraud would have an easier path to getting justice and compensation now. The legal database had my case listed as a reference point for identity theft involving medical records and false pregnancy claims. Bradley forwarded me the article too, with a note saying I'd accidentally become famous in legal circles, even if my name was redacted from the public documents. Life settled into the best kind of boring routine, where work challenges were actually about debugging code instead of explaining fake pregnancies. Neighbors waved hello in the hallway without whispering behind my back or trying to plan surprise showers. My dating profile just said software developer, with no need to explain any dramatic backstory about medical fraud or false pregnancy claims. The server room at work was my domain again, where I could focus on actual technical problems. New people joined the company who had no idea about my weird history and just saw me as the senior dev who knew the systems inside and out. Even the building group chat had moved on to complaining about the new recycling rules instead of discussing my non-existent baby. Mom called less frequently now that she wasn't worried about me dealing with legal battles and just wanted normal updates about work and dating. The whole experience felt like something that happened to someone else, even though I still had the legal documents filed away as proof it was all real. Well, friends, this really has been a journey, and I appreciate you sticking with me through all my questions and wonderings. Can't wait to do it again. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.